All right. Good morning, everyone. We are live at the table, and thank you for being here. I'm excited to have this conversation. As most of you know, I don't typically focus on compliance or policy issues in these sessions or even in my consulting practice. I'm typically focusing on transformation and culture and talent acquisition and supporting executives in leadership. But with all of the crazy changes and the rapid updates and pivoting that we are having to do in the workplace, I thought it really might be helpful to many of you who are either an HR department of one or even a CEO or a COO wondering, what does this new presidential mandate mean for you as an organization or as an individual practitioner? And I don't have those answers. So I reached out to a very trusted resource friend who I've known in the community for many, many years here in Tampa. So joining us today is Bill Grob, and he is a partner at his firm, and I will let Bill share with you a little bit about himself. Of course, right now, one of my cats has decided to play with a toy, and it's bouncing all over the place. So if you see anything flying in the camera space, it's a cat. Sorry about that. As a quick reminder, if you have questions you would like us to address, please go ahead and enter them in the chat, and we will see them, and then we will address them to the audience versus just responding in the chat. We love questions. We love to see all of you here. So thank you for being here. With that, Bill, welcome to the table. Thank you so much, especially I know you're in the middle of doing so many things, and I believe you're even traveling right now. So I want to thank you. And I know you also have a hard stop, so we want to jump in and get to whatever questions might be there. But before we do that, tell us a little bit about your role today, what you focus on. I know how I've experienced your advice in the past, but I kind of share with the audience so that they can get a sense of your expertise and why you're such a great resource for us.
Sure. Thank you so much for having me, Barbie. I love your program. And, as you know, we see each other quite often when we're speaking. And I truly love to hear your engagements because they're so interesting and so informative. And I know you do so many great things for your clients. And I truly appreciate that as someone who services a lot of clients. As you know, I'm a shareholder with Ogletree Deacons. I'm based in Tampa, but I practice across the country and across the globe, 1,000 lawyers and over 50 offices throughout the country and in Europe, Mexico, Canada. There's really no place that we don't touch. And everything that I do is commensurate with something that's happening in employment on behalf of the employer. And for example, you talked about your cat this morning. I was just speaking this morning. I just got out of a speaking engagement about 20 minutes ago. I was talking about engaging your remote workforce, which is very difficult. But I talked about the idea of there are things on Zoom that happen that you don't expect. Most of the time, it's someone gets up and they're not wearing pants, but other times there are cats and dogs and children. And so there are things that are somewhat outside of your control. And we truly have to be adaptable and be able to take those things as they come and continue on, right? It's like scent of a woman. If you get tangled up, tango on. And that's what we do.
Yes. And your firm has such an amazing reputation, and you're a big part of why they have such an amazing reputation. So thank you for being so generous with your time for our audience and helping people understand. So I can tell you, I watched President Biden's address last week and waiting to see like what's going to happen. What is he going to share with us? And, of course, as soon as I hear what he would like to see happen, the questions start popping up in my mind. And what does this mean? And what if you have fewer than 100 employees, but maybe next week you hire somebody and now it puts you at 101. Like there's just so many things that I think are worrying or on the minds of our folks, not to mention folks who, simply don't believe in vaccines and don't believe in moving forward in that direction, which, our country allows you to have your own beliefs and to share those. So if you're in the position right now of having to figure out what to do, where would you recommend someone start? What's a baseline to say, okay, let me assess where I am to figure out where I need to go?
Probably the most important thing is to assess your workplace, right? Do you have a workplace where you can actually facilitate social distancing and masking up? A lot of folks don't have that, especially in certain environments where you're very guest facing, whether it be in retail or restaurants, food service, QSRs. Folks who are in manufacturing a lot of times don't have the opportunity to socially distance. So the first place is understand your work environment and what is it that we can do from a safety standpoint to make sure that we reduce as much as possible the transmission of this terrible, terrible virus. And so if you're in a situation where you can't socially distance, realistically inside your workplace, and even masking up, I mean, certainly you can mask up, but if you can't socially distance, that's a real problem. Then you might have to look to potentially mandating vaccines. And I will just say the one thing that this vaccine mandate, at least, the one that we're expecting, has done is it's given credence to employers who have already said you must vax in order to come back to work, regardless of size, whether you're over 100 or under 100. If OSHA is going to come out and say you have a vaccine mandate for 100 or over, everybody's got to do it. Well, then they're not going to come after you if you're less than 100 and you have a vaccine mandate. So a lot of employers were asking, can we realistically do it? Are we permitted to do it? Or will OSHA be sore at us? And that has answered the question, no, you are going to be permitted to do it as an employer.
Okay. So in that, you froze a little bit for me, and I think I had a connectivity issue. No. I think it's on my end. So just for clarity, what is it that you were saying that you can and can't do? I missed it. It was all black.
Sure, you bet. For clarity, it's you can mandate vaccinations. I think it answers the question with mandating it for federal contractors, which has already been signed, and then mandating it with regard to the OSHA initiative, which is what President Biden told OSHA to do. I think it's answered the question for employers, will the EEOC come after me or will OSHA come after me if I have an employee mandate and I'm less than 100 employees? Absolutely, you can do it. If OSHA says you can do it with over 100 employees, then you can do it with under 100 employees.
Got it. Okay, that's super helpful because I've had a few people reach out to me and say, I don't have 100 employees. Do I even need to worry about this? And my question is, first, ask an attorney, not me, but I can give you an opinion. An opinion is that regardless if you have 5 employees or you have 5 million employees, I think you need to do what's in the best interest of safety and precaution in the workplace. And like you said, where you can create distancing, where you can create safe spaces and allow people to work remotely, do that. But we know that there's a lot of workplaces and workforces that simply cannot work remotely. You can't be a nurse from home unless you're reading charts, right? You're not actually delivering patient care remotely. So there's so many people who have to be face-to-face. One of the questions I have is, and I'm hearing frequently, is it the new presidential mandate? Because we know that there's the mandate for federal employees, right? That truly is a vaccine mandate. Yep. But the most recent mandate from last week, is it a vaccine mandate or is it a testing mandate? Because my understanding, and I could be wrong here, is that it's not a vaccine mandate. He's saying they can choose or not to be vaccinated, but if they choose not to, then you've got to be testing them every week. But maybe I'm hearing that wrong.
Well, you're absolutely right. There's a lot of questions about that. And the bottom line is we don't know what the OSHA mandate is going to say, but it's not necessarily a testing mandate. The mandate is really about vaccinations. The mandate, as far as we know, that's been telegraphed by the administration, is it's going to say that everyone over 100 employees, every employer with over 100 employees must mandate having the vaccination. It will also talk about if you don't have the vaccination, and we don't know whether it's people who don't have the vaccination because they are simply opposed to it without a legal basis for the opposition, or people who are opposed to it because they may have a disability, a medical condition, or a religious belief that somehow would prohibit them from having the vaccination. We don't know whether the testing guideline is going to apply just to those folks with a legally based excuse for getting the vaccine, or just about anyone, or whether it's going to give employers of over 100 employees the discretion to do the weekly testing versus mandating the vaccine, whether it's going to be a choice. We don't believe that it's going to be a choice. We believe that the mandate is going to be get vaxxed. If you can't get vaxxed for a legally cognizable reason, then you can potentially do the testing if the testing is going to help. Because, for example, we have an airline recently, and I won't mention the airline, but an airline has said you have to be vaxxed. If you're not vaxxed, or if you have a religious exemption, and they specifically talked about the religious exemption, then we're going to put you on an indefinite leave without pay. Now, it's a job, it appears to be a job protected leave, but they've taken a very hard stance, because how do you tell a flight attendant, even if you have the test, right, on a weekly basis, this person is in front of hundreds and thousands of people every week, right? Depending on how many flights they're doing, depending on what seniority they have, dictates how many flights that individual may have. And they're in front of people. There's no way that you can maintain a socially distanced environment on that plane. And so, you have to do what's going to be best for the workforce. But we see the vaccine mandate as just that. You must be vaxxed. And if you're not vaxxed, we're going to give you an option, but you have to be able to utilize that option in a safe manner. If you cannot, then it may not be an option for you. Go back to rule number one. And if it's rule number one, then you may have to end up in either a leave situation or a termination situation.
Okay. That's really helpful. I somehow interpreted it that was date versus the mandate. So I appreciate that clarity. So we do have a question here from Bernie. What are the effective dates for categories?
Bernie, I wish I knew. I wish I could tell you what the effective dates are, but OSHA doesn't even know. The one thing about it, so this is going to be an emergency temporary standard. An emergency temporary standard is different from the normal standards that OSHA provides, because normally OSHA would ask for comments from the public and take those comments into account. That doesn't happen with an emergency temporary standard, an ETS. And an ETS, the president has directed OSHA to do something. They're going to put it together, and they're going to send it out. And then when it appears in the Federal Register, then it'll be effective. But we just don't know when that's going to happen. We think it's going to be soon, probably within the next 30 to 60 days, if that long.
So with that being said, as of right now, employers are not expected to be enacting this mandate. Am I interpreting that correctly, that they have until that deadline of when it's on the books technically for this to be in effect?
That is correct. Unless you're a federal contractor and subject to the executive order, yes, the mandate will have a date certain on when it takes effect. So what a lot of employers have done now, they've already mandated the vaccine as it is, and they've given people up to, right now I'm hearing a date of October 1st, right? Be vaccinated, or you're going to have to engage in the testing. If you can't engage in the testing, where we won't have a safe work environment, then you're going to have to do something else, either go on leave, which would be a protected leave, or find another job. Hopefully the latter part isn't going to happen. I think when this whole COVID thing started, I think the agencies took a very pragmatic, proactive, and effective practical approach. And they basically said, look, we're not coming after you if you're laying people off or letting people go, but try to do as much as you can. Try to err on the side of the employee, work with the employee, and be reasonable. I thought that was an incredibly reasonable position to take by the administrative agencies, and frankly applaud them for doing so. But it really has been a very cooperative, cohesive environment, a sense of community, because everybody is affected by this. And so we want to try to do what's best for the employee as much as we can. But at some point in time, we're going to have to say, if you can't come into work and we're in an environment where we can't socially distance or provide you a safe environment without you being vaccinated, then we're going to have to do something different.
Got it. Okay, we've got a ton of questions coming in. I wasn't all right, so I'm going to start throwing them at you. All right, thank you, Bernie. Okay, Carla says, what about employees who show medical proof of active antibodies who do not want to get a vaccine?
So Carla and I grew up together. We've known each other since preschool. Hi, Carla. I will tell you that we get this question a lot. And unfortunately, just because you have antibodies doesn't mean that you're vaccinated against getting the virus. It just means that you have antibodies to fight the virus. It doesn't protect you against the most severe forms of the virus. So that's something only the vaccine can provide. Just because your body has antibodies and may have fought it doesn't mean that it's fought the Delta variant or another variant of the virus. So antibodies are fine. They show that you have some protection, but not nearly the level of protection that the vaccine provides.
Thank you. I've had that question too. I've even had friends say, "Oh, I don't need to wear a mask. I'm good. I'm not vaccinated, but I have antibodies." And I'm like, "But for how long?" Like that. I'm not a doctor. I don't know how antibodies work. But like, do you have them for a week? Do you have them for a month? Like, I don't know. Get away. I don't want your antibodies anywhere near me. So I get it. It's so confusing. All right, Beth Campbell, thanks. This is a great question. If you mandate the vaccine and someone has a reaction, is that considered an OSHA recordable?
I'm not sure.
Thought about that.
No, and I haven't either. I would defer to our OSHA practitioners in the firm, and we have some folks who are the best in the business. I would defer to them. I just don't know the answer to that, but I can find out. And if you email me separately, Beth, I'll get an answer for you.
Great question. And we'll get that answer, and I'll make sure to post it out there on LinkedIn as well. Oh, see, cat toy. I wasn't kidding. It just came flying in. All right.
Can overcome.
Yes. All right. Robin, will it be site-based or company-based? In other words, if the company has over 100 employees, but offices have less than 100 employees, does that make a difference?
And understand this is all speculation. We believe that it's going to be a company-based mandate. So if your company has over 100 employees, but here's the other question, right? There is no exception or exemption in the federal mandate for remote employees. What if you have 100 employees and they're all remote and never have to come into the office or face anyone for that matter? Do they have to be vaccinated? We don't know whether there's going to be an exemption or exception for folks that are remote employees. That's been a question that's come up quite a bit, but we believe that it's going to be any company with 100 or more employees, which is, remember, if we go back to the beginnings of COVID and we were talking about things that had to happen, and they talked about the Emergency Relief Act, right? Where you had people who got the emergency leave for companies that were over 500 employees. It wasn't location specific, it was company specific. So I think we can look at that to see what telegraphs what may be required under the new ETS.
Great. Man, this is complicated. All right. Sarah, do you have to offer the option of testing? And if so, does the employer have to pay for the test and the time to get tested? This was one thing I was worrying about or concerned about from a cost perspective, right? Because now the employer is bearing the cost of this for people who make a choice not to get vaccinated.
Absolutely. And that's a great question, Sarah. That's a question that we're hearing quite often. So we look at the prior ETS, the Emergency Temporary Standard for healthcare workers, right? Where healthcare workers who are on the front lines must be vaccinated or get tested. And so by looking at that, we find out that the actual mandate requires you to pay for both the testing and the time it takes to get the testing. So we can go back to that because right now the EEOC, if you look at the EEOC frequently asked questions about testing and getting vaccinated, there's a question about that. I think it's question number 57 or 58 in the EEOC frequently asked questions. And the question is, hey, do I have to pay my employees to go out and get tested? Do I have to pay for the test, and do I have to pay for the time to take the test? Right now, the EEOC said it depends. It depends on what the purpose is that you're doing this. We expect to see some type of clarification in the ETS mandate on vaccinations. I suspect that once it becomes a mandate from OSHA, that employers will have to pay both for the testing itself and the time it takes to get the testing. Whether or not employers will have the option of doing mandatory vaccination or doing the testing, I think we'll see that in the substance of the Emergency Temporary Standard.
Okay, so with that, Bill, a question that comes to my mind, and I'm not sitting in that CHRO seat these days, but one of the questions that would be weighing heavily on me is, if that's the case, and now I'm in a position from a budget perspective, my business has been impacted by COVID. We've lost revenue. We've had to go through all of this. Now I'm faced with an additional expense, and I have no control over what people do or don't do. Am I okay to terminate someone who refuses to get the vaccine because as the employer, I'm not going to build a budget around COVID testing. That's just not in my wheelhouse. We don't have the funding to do that. So if you make a choice not to be vaccinated, you can't work here. Or are employers safe to do that these days?
Generally, the answer is yes, but it depends on the reason for not getting vaccinated. If it's a medical reason, a disability reason, or a religious exemption reason, then you have to engage in the interactive process with an employee. If the employee still refuses to get vaccinated, that may have either a disability or a medical condition or a religious reason for the exemption, then you get to determine if there is ever going to be something that individual can do, right, that would qualify as safe by using the weekly testing. If you're, for example, a flight attendant in an airline and you have to be up front facing for individuals and you're not going to let any other flight attendants be unvaccinated, then you may just have to put that person on leave. That may be part of the interactive process, but you must engage and document. The EEOC wants to see documentation of the engaging in the interactive process. So make sure you document the interactive process, and then you go from there to determine whether or not there is an accommodation that can be made for that person who cannot get vaxxed for one reason or another, and if that accommodation is something that you can work with in the workplace. If it's not something that's going to be workable at all, then your only option really may be leave or separate employment. But that's really just a last resort if you have to get to it.
Okay. And when you say document the interactive process, say more about that.
Sure. And so whenever you're going through the interactive process with someone who has a disability or a medical condition, then you want to make sure that you're asking the employee, right, what is it that we can do to facilitate that particular condition that you have that allows you or will allow you to perform the essential functions of the job. So many times we see people say, no, you can't come back to work without a release to return to work 100% or a full release to return to work. We never want to say that. We always want to talk about, can you come back and perform the essential functions of the job? So the interactive process is, what measures can we take together, me, the employer, you, the employee, that you believe would permit you to perform the essential functions of the job? And in this case, for example, if someone can come to work and then maybe have a office that is set aside that can be guaranteed socially distanced and they can mask up, then maybe testing is the option for that particular employee. But if it's someone that's a guest facing, someone who must interact with guests all the time, or your customers, well, you may have to do something different, maybe a temporary leave while you look for another position for that employee where the employee can perform the essential functions of the job without being vaccinated. But you want to document those discussions. A lot of times we do it in email format. I have a form that I use that I provide to clients that just talks about, what did you ask the employee? Who asked the employee? What was the response? How did the company respond to that? And then even follows up to determine whether that particular accommodation, get the employee after a week or two or a month to come back to you and say, hey, look, this is working out great, or this accommodation isn't working, because at least now you've documented all the way up through the efficacy of that particular accommodation that you've made, and that will help you in any kind of claim down the road.
Okay. There's so many parts to this. Okay, we have so many questions, guys. This is a long one. Where did it go? I'm going to try to read it because I'll see if it can go. Oh, okay, here we go. All right. Can you provide guidance to employers with multiple companies? Do we consider the employee count separately or altogether? I found some language for private employers who are subject to the EEO-1 reporting and wonder if this might apply for the new vaccine mandate. It states private employers who are subject to Title VII of the Civil Rights Act of 1964 have 100 or more employees, fewer than 100 employees. So what are your thoughts with that?
Yeah, I think that we can only prophesize from here, and who knows if it's just pure speculation or not. But I agree with the listener that the agency will look toward first its own past initiatives that it's used and language that it's used. For example, it may look toward what was done early on with the 500 limit for employers, whether that included just single employers or affiliates of one larger employer. generally, the question also comes up in a joint employer context to determine number of employees working for you. And so these companies that would be affiliated, if they share, they'll look to, do you share the same board? Do you share the same management structure? A lot of times those companies will be counted together. But for example, if you're a PE, right, you're a private equity provider, and you invest in a whole lot of companies, you don't run their boards and you don't run their management. It's just something that you invest in. So you would not accumulate all of those employers, for example, under a PE. We don't know what it's going to say, but I suspect, and we believe that it's going to be something similar to that. If you're a multiple employer organization, a lot of organizations, they have their employees that are based in one particular facet of the organization, a separate company, if you will, that all work for the same umbrella company, then you're probably going to count that together. We just don't know what it's going to say. But excellent point that you can look to the past to sort of prophesize what the new ETS is going to say.
Got it. All right, so Kim has a great question. We're a federal contractor, and many of the agencies have started requiring us to obtain a vaccination attestation. This was before Biden's executive order. Now it's an honor system, and we're taking their word for it. Do we think that we will actually require proof of the vaccination? And I think there's another question in there that says, if we require proof, where do we store this proof? What do we do with it? And what if we, as an employer, are expected to provide, right? If we're audited for this proof, what does that look like, right? And especially, I think today, where everybody just has, like, I have my Vax card on my phone, right, in case I ever need it. So what do we do with that?
Well, it's interesting because I went up to New York about a month ago, and we actually saw the only Broadway show that was playing at the time, the Bruce Springsteen Broadway show, and you had to be vaxxed, and you had to show your vaccination card in order to get into that event. So here in Florida, of course, that would not be permitted under Governor DeSantis's order with regard to showing your vaccination card. So the question is, I think the first question is, can we rely on vaccination attestations? Right now, the opinion is yes, because you can see, as you've probably seen in the news, these cards are fairly easy to reproduce and fairly easy to find fraudulent cards available. We've seen a number of fraudulent cards out there, and so we're probably going to see a sort of a black market for fraudulent cards that we see now. Attestations to me are just as good. I mean, you're getting an employee to swear and affirm that they have been tested when and where. Employers in Florida can still ask for the vaccine cards. That is not in violation of the governor's mandate. That's only for customers and patrons of somewhere. Employees are not considered those things. So the real answer to the question is, we don't know. I believe an attestation would be good. I'm just one lawyer. Shockingly, lawyers have different opinions, different lawyers from the same firm and different firms. That's why we get together and sort of talk about what our opinions are. But I would say yes for now, an attestation is fine unless the mandate requires the vaccination card. I do believe that there has been some discussion. I can't remember if it was in the discussion from the president about showing the actual vaccine card, but you may anticipate that may be a requirement. If you have an official card, despite the idea that there are fraudulent cards out there, that may be the best evidence of receiving the vaccine.
Yeah, I wonder if we're going to move into almost like an I-9, right? There's an official I-9 form that every employee fills out when they start working to, prove that they have a legal right to work here. And if this moves into that kind of thing where they create the form that people will then have to, attest and show that they've done it. I who knows where it might go. Travis has a question. Similar to the previous question, most of my employees don't want to disclose if they are vaxxed. How do we collect that information, especially if they claim PHI, if employees don't want to disclose?
Well, I mean, it is PHI, but remember the employer is allowed to gather PHI. It does it with regard to the FMLA and the ADA. So the employer is permitted to gather an employee's PHI. That PHI must be secured in the same way that any other medical information is secured. So you want to narrow the chain of custody in those things. If you just have one individual in your HR department who's required for doing that, you take it just like any other medical information that people require for certain leaves and things like that. Make sure that information is gathered up, that it's secure, that it's locked up, that we follow all of the parameters of what's required to maintain PHI. And here's where the real issue comes up. It's in contingent workforce issues. What if you're a staffing agency and you're staffing an employer, and that employer that you're staffing requires people to be vaxxed, and they want to see that people are vaxxed that you are presenting them? The question is, would that violate any type of security procedure, safety precaution, or medical documentation? And so my response to that, and again, a lot of people have different responses, is that the contingent employer, the one who's doing the staffing, can say whether someone is has qualified under the existing protocol. So this person is qualified to be staffed with you under the existing protocol and is compliant, without saying whether or not the person is actually vaccinated or has a vaccination excuse, but you're not actually sharing that medical information. You're just saying that this person qualifies under the current protocol to be staffed at your facility. So there are different ways that people are going to go about it. We don't know specifically what the mandate is going to say, but the more that the mandate requires proof of vaccination, the more we'll get some insight as to what is going to run afoul of people's rights with regard to their personal health information.
Okay. And so when we think about the federal contractors or the federal employees right now, and then if we take it to federal contractors, and I think back in the days when I was involved with any type of affirmative action reporting, and if you're a subcontractor to a contractor of a federal contract, like how far down does the existing federal employee mandate go? Versus where does it start to get gray as far as required vaccines right now?
And so that's a good question. One of the issues is, we've had folks that have said, "Hey, look, I'm a nonprofit. I get federal funding. Does that qualify me as a federal contractor?" Generally, no. It's the folks that are actually have the contracts themselves that are being staffed as federal contractors, not necessarily that you're just receiving federal funding. We haven't really seen any examples of folks further down the line trying to suggest that they are part of that mandate and then trying to excuse themselves from the mandate. I think if we see any violations, and again, OSHA and the agencies have taken a very solid, practical, pragmatic approach. We haven't seen them become too overbearing. We've seen more OSHA investigations with regard to safe workplaces. We're going to see OSHA very active in the field, so make sure that you're prepared for that. For OSHA to come knocking at your door, I recommend the roadhouse method: be nice until it's time not to be nice, and when it's time not to be nice, then get your lawyers involved. But right now, for those federal contractors who are part of the mandate and the executive order, it's generally those direct federal contractors who are actually staffing as federal contractors.
Okay. And our friend Bernie has another question, I think, related to this, is there any guidance for military veterans refusing to get the vaccine and are being told they will be dishonorably discharged? I mean, that's a very specific question, but.
Sure. No, and Bernie is so great and in touch with the military. Bernie does so many things in our community to help people who have left the military to find jobs, and is such a good guy. And I agree with you, Bernie. That's a difficult question. I had not heard that the military was threatening dishonorable discharge. I really don't know what the answer is to that question. I suspect that there's going to be probably more communication on it, and maybe something that is covered in the new mandate. We don't know, but I know that you will keep your finger on the pulse of that, and maybe you and I will get together and talk about that, so I can make sure that people are informed outside of the two of us.
That would be fantastic. And Bernie, reach out to me if you wouldn't mind, if we're not already connected. I have a couple questions for you on some things I'd like to do to support some of our transitioning veterans. Totally different conversation, but I love to find people who are connected in that community.
Bernie does such a great job with that. He's the best.
Excellent. Excellent. All right. Another question. And this is a question I asked a few people yesterday in a session I was doing, but do we know what the consequences are going to be? Do we have any idea? I mean, we're used to fines, right? You can be fined if you're out of compliance, but I mean, could they come and shut down your company? Like
OSHA, sure, it's OSHA, right? So OSHA gets to do, OSHA's going to OSHA, as we say, right? OSHA's going to be OSHA. OSHA deals with fines, with penalties. OSHA does have the authority to certainly shut down your company. It is, we don't believe that in any way, shape, or form it's going to be something that's a first resort for OSHA to do. But I mean, OSHA deals with violations and penalties associated with those violations, civil monetary penalties, and the more you violate, the more the penalty is. So I suspect we will see a per violation penalty associated with that. We will see OSHA probably proactively out in the workplace first to make those determinations, and maybe there's not a fine or penalty, even though they can assess a fine or penalty. I have found OSHA to be pretty reasonable with regard to assessing penalties. They get a little bit more sore at you when you're a repeat offender, so try not to be in that category. But anything that OSHA can do now, they're going to be able to do with regard to this emergency temporary standard.
Okay, let's see here. Leanna, what type of legal challenges do you think this is going to face? And do you think there is a possibility that a court could block enforcement of the ETS until challenges are resolved?
That is certainly always a possibility, right? We've seen that in a number of different cases. We saw that with regard to the state of Florida and the non-mask mandate that Governor DeSantis had implemented. We saw a circuit court say that was not constitutional and block the mandate. We just saw the Court of Appeals say, no, you were wrong, circuit court. The mandate should not be blocked and is constitutional. I suspect that we're going to see the Supremes wade in. We've seen this with a recent Texas law that has garnered a lot of concern over that law. That law has already been seen by the Supreme Court, the United States Supreme Court. The Supreme Court did not block the law, but it was on a technical issue. So we expect it to go back up to the Supreme Court at some point in time. But that is always what happens. If you get an interest group or a group of employees who say, hey, no, this is wrong, then they go to the courts, for example, to determine whether or not it's constitutional, not constitutional, or permissible. Very recently, 2 weeks ago, the 200 plaintiffs in Gainesville have sued the city of Gainesville for a vaccine mandate. I don't know where that challenge stands right now. I know it was filed. I saw it was filed a couple weeks ago. That's going to be one of the initial cases I think we'll look to see how the court decides on that.
Wow. It's just there's so many pieces to this that you get one answer and it leads you to the next question, right? And
that's the thing, Barbie, right? I mean, we've got information overload, and people, people are talking about, the use of fetal tissue in the vaccines, and there's so many different nuances and permutations that come out of every single question. It's hard to be able to address every single one of them, but what I would tell you is do your best to stay informed, right? Try to talk to the practitioners who understand it the best to get at least the best read on situations and the content of those situations, so you can make the best possible decisions to make sure that you have a safe and effective work environment for your employees.
I can't agree with that enough. And this is what as I said, people ask me these questions all the time. And my response is, I've had people ask me, should I get the vaccine? I don't know. I go ask your physician, right? If you want advice on what to do with your body and your health, ask someone who went to medical school and understands what that means. Ask someone who works in bioscience, who understands how vaccines are formulated. Don't ask an HR person if you should get a vaccine or not. It's not my wheelhouse. Just like trying to interpret all of these things, people are asking me, well, how should I handle this? Am I going to get fined? ask an attorney, go to people who went to school and have education around the nuances and the specificity that we need to make informed decisions. And that's really why I wanted to do this today, because I keep getting questions in my DMs all day long about what should we do? How should we handle it? And I don't want to give people the wrong information, because I don't feel like I'm in a position to give expert advice when it comes to this. You want to ask me about culture and values? I'm your girl. Vaccines, not so much. So I am glad that we are getting this level of detail out there for people. It's just so confusing. I feel like it's very confusing. Another question, how much time will be given to implement the ETS once it's out?
So not sure. I think probably 30 to 60 days. We've seen that in the past. There may be a small grace period with regard to people who have not gotten the vaccine. There may be additional incentives that are announced by the emergency temporary standard. For example, we've seen one company who has added an additional cost to the employer, the employee cost of their health care that stimulated, according to the organization, a 5-fold increase in vaccinations. You know, there are certainly threats that are associated with that, depending on whether or not that can be attributed to a wellness plan, which likely would not be permissible, or if not, likely could be permissible. We just don't know. But this organization has really volunteered itself to be the beta on the issue, but it did it because it wants a safe work environment, and it is demanding a safe work environment for all of its employees and all of its guests and customers. And certainly that's what organizations want to have. I think that's what people want to have. Even if they refuse to get the vaccine for whatever reason, whether that reason is guided or misguided, then the question is, you certainly don't want to have an unsafe working environment. Nobody wants that. Nobody wants that for themselves. No one wants it for their family. No one wants it for their coworkers. So I think we're all in agreement that we want to do the right thing and provide a safe environment, but go to your trusted sources, the practitioners, the person with the KSAs, the knowledge, skills, and whatever the A is. That's it. That know the information that can help you make a guided and informed decision.
Yeah. So really quick question on the increased premium, because I have had several organizations, I've seen it out there, I've talked to people about it. Why would there be any concerns about the increase in premiums? We do that for tobacco users, right? You attest that you're a tobacco user, you pay an increase in your premiums or some sort of upcharge. Now, of course, it's all voluntary, right? There's no way for me to get proof whether you are or not a tobacco user, but why would there be any difference in this?
Well, I mean, and that's the question, right? There are a number of laws that would be affected. Certainly the ADA is one of them. GINA would be one of them, Genetic Information Non-Disclosure Act. ERISA, because it's a health plan and a benefit. Those are questions that I know the benefits lawyers have taken a very close look at, but we don't know whether requiring a vaccination is going to be held to be part of a wellness initiative. And there's different rules if it's wellness initiatives, much like the smokers and the tobacco users issues that we saw in times past. So the answer is we don't know. We don't know how the vaccine is going to be treated. It's going to take someone actually going to court over the issue to determine A, how the agency feels about it, or B, how the courts feel about it.
So today an employer can choose to do that. We just don't know if they can be sued for it.
We don't know if it's lawful. That's correct.
Got it. Okay. That's really important, because I know a lot of companies are leaning into that right now, or considering leaning into that right now, because they feel like, well, we can do it for tobacco, we can do it for this. But what I'm hearing is we don't really know yet if it's going to fall into that same category. So it doesn't mean you can't do it. It just means be cautiously aware of the steps you're taking and the potential implications long term.
And it doesn't mean that you shouldn't do it, right? I mean, we take risks all the time as employers, and certainly every time we terminate someone, it's a risk. But if we can defend it and we have a justifiable defense for it, a legitimate, non-discriminatory reason that we're doing what we do, then absolutely we're going to take the safety approach over the potential harm. As long as we feel like we're doing what's right and lawful, we're gonna make that safety decision first every single time.
Wow. Okay. That's helpful. All right. Leanna says, so as a private employer with over 100 employees, what do you recommend we do today while waiting for the ETS guidelines?
Well, Leanne, that's a good question. The question is, what are you doing now, right? If you don't have a mandatory vaccination program, maybe look at other opportunities to incentivize vaccinations. If you feel like you're going to have to qualify and you don't want to implement right now you could implement mandatory vaccinations because it's going to be coming, and then give a date certain. Like if you're not vaccinated or you can't show proof of vaccination by October 1st, then we're going to engage in the interactive process. If you have a legally cognizable excuse for not getting vaccinated, we're going to, and it's not an excuse, but a legitimate reason for a medical condition, disability, or a religious reason that you're not getting vaccinated. But look at your policy now and try to up the ante to get more vaccinations, to incentivize more vaccinations, or maybe put in the mandatory policy now and give them till November 1st to get vaccinated. Odds are the new emergency temporary standard may or may not have that as an implementation date, but at least it gives you some sense of getting in front of the curve, ahead of the curve.
So I had a conversation with someone yesterday. So much like sexual harassment, if you're an HR practitioner and you know something is happening and you don't take action on it, and at a point in time that individual sues the company, you can be named, right? You knew what was going on. You are now part of that. As an HR practitioner or as a leader in an organization, if your CEO has a very hard stance on, maybe they're an anti-vax person and they believe that their fundamental civil liberties and rights are being infringed upon by the president saying that people must be vaccinated. And so he or she is saying, no, I'm not doing this for my company. I'm not going to comply, and let them come after me. What does that HR person, is there anything that person or that leader needs to do to protect themselves? I mean, they may choose to find a new job. That's one thing. But if maybe there isn't anything out there for them, or they're in a geography where, they can't find something else, what do we do in that circumstance? Or do you have any recommendations in that circumstance when really the decision is now out of their control?
Sure. And so, folks that are true believers, as we may refer to some of these folks as true believers, they're going to live and die by the sword, right? And we've seen this. I'm sure, Barbie, I'm sure you've worked in places where you may have disagreed with what was going on because you didn't feel it was the right approach or the lawful approach, and maybe it fell on deaf ears. But I will tell you, it starts at the top, right? Everything starts at the top and rolls down from there. So whatever the commitment is, and especially when we're talking about things like DEI or implementation of programs, if you don't have buy-in from the top, then you're not going to get buy-in anywhere else. And so if you have someone at the top who says, I don't believe in vaccinations, I think this is a load of hooey that we're being sold, and you guys are out there buying Jack's Magic Beans, then you may have to make another decision. It's shown up so many times now. In fact, I'm speaking this afternoon on effective investigations, and the idea that, what do you do when it's someone in the C-suite or maybe a company leader that we've seen so often? How do you do an investigation when you're HR and number one, you're seen as biased toward the individual because you're a company person paid by the company to do a company investigation, and
Right.
and how do you get that behavior in line with someone who's your boss who refuses to behave? And so we talk about the idea of going outside of the company and getting an independent counsel, which we've seen so many times, which we just saw in the Cuomo investigation, to do that investigation. Because here's what people are seeing, right? They're seeing that investigations are more fair and unbiased when you're going outside of the company to hire that practitioner who's doing the investigation. Plus, you have the additional benefits of privilege that are associated with those investigations. It's the same thing when you're in HR and someone above you is doing something that you really have no control over, and that person is not giving you the street cred that you need in order to do your job. Unfortunately, sometimes you're either going to have to stick around, and if you stick around, make sure you're documenting your advice, that you're sending that advice in emails so that you can document. And it doesn't have to be adversarial, but at least it has to say, look, I love working at this place, and I want it to be the best and most safe place that it is. And, I disagree that this is a bunch of hooey that's being fed to us. I disagree that the vaccinations are magic beans. I truly believe that we need to implement this as a company to keep our workforce and our workplace as safe as possible for both our employees and our customers. And, if the CEO still continues, or the person in charge still continues to say, no, not going to do it, not going to require anyone to do it, maybe I'll fire people who do it. Who knows where that's going to go? One of my mottos when I was in HR, if you can't change people, you change people. You might just have to change people.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's what I was sharing, is you may have to make a decision as to, one, what aligns with your personal values, right? Do you really want to work for someone if you have a position that is, absolutely opposed to their position? Is that the right culture and environment for you? And can you support that? And then just your own well-being, right? Do you want to work in that environment where there's that much friction and tension for until whenever? So I agree. I think we have to make decisions that are in our best interests first, always, and then next would be the company and employees and everything else. So makes sense.
Well, remember, you're the paragon, right? You're the paragon of DEI when it comes to HR and the company culture, and making sure that singular voice is heard among everyone that works for you. So you're the flag bearer when it comes to that. And if you can't be, then you're not going to be efficacious, and you're going to be down low on Maslow's hierarchy, and you're not going to feel good about yourself.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. If you lack that alignment in any regard, not just with COVID, but in any element, right? It's not the right fit. And you'll be much happier in a place where there is a better fit, and you'll have a much greater impact for sure. Hey, Tara, thanks for being here. Appreciate the shout out earlier. Thank you so much. Tara asks, will there be a grace period? With all the unknown, it seems like any punishment would be thrown out or easily defensible.
Yeah, and there's likely going to be an implementation period, but keep in mind, even if it's a shorter grace period, again, I think the agencies have been very reasonable in their approach to these things. There may not be a grace period, but unless you're out there in their face about it, like, I ain't ever going to be doing that, then they're probably going to work with you, and you're going to work with them. And like I said, adopt the Roadhouse method. Be nice until it's time not to be nice.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, Nicole, let's see, is there a question in here? Yeah, I love what Nicole shares here. Is this conversation is evidence that HR needs to be at the table, hence the name of my show, The Table. In case any of you wonder why it's called The Table, it's because for my entire career, we have been clamoring for a seat at the table. So I made the table, because we're taking our seats, we're claiming our place. So I love that she said that. So thank you for the promo there. But we need to be at the table, being part of these discussions. We can't allow these discussions that are impacting our workforces to happen behind closed doors and then be handed down to us from people who aren't as knowledgeable and haven't had exposure to this level of detail and information. So I totally agree there. And thank you for that reinforcement, Nicole. It's great. All right, we are coming up. We've got about 4 minutes left, according to my clock over here. And I know, Bill, you've got another speaking engagement. So if folks need outside counsel support and guidance, what is the best way for people to reach you? Is it to find you on LinkedIn? Is it just to go to your website? How do we connect you with people who might need your help?
Yeah, and so it's fairly easy for me. If you punch in my name into any search, Bill Grob, lawyer, then you'll find out It'll take you, I believe, first to my work website. But my email address is bill.grob or william.grob. Remember, there's no E at the end of my last name, so it's GROB at Ogletree or at ogletreedeacons.com. So I have 6 email addresses. Any one of them get to me. Very easy to find on the internet. And my clock doesn't tick for short calls. If you just have a question about something that I can answer for you, I want you to be able to be proactive. As long as it doesn't require me to do any research or ask other of my colleagues, then feel free to bounce something off of me. I'm happy for you to call, and my clock's not going to start running.
Oh, you're so gracious. Thank you so much for that. And you can always reach out to me, guys, on LinkedIn or my email. I put it in my post pretty frequently, and I can always get questions over to Bill and connect you that way as well. We do have one more question if we can squeeze it in really quickly. Sarah Williams asks, will we talk a little bit about what a religious accommodation might look like?
Yeah, and so that's the question, right? Really, what a religious accommodation looks like right now, by and large, is weekly testing. That's been the primary response with regard to religious accommodations. I believe that as we see these come in, there's a lot of religious accommodations that just say, I read the Bible, and the Bible says my body is a temple, and so I don't want to desecrate that temple by taking a vaccination. We've seen a lot of newer requests for religious exemption on the fetal tissue issue. So I think we're gonna see more narrowing. Remember that a religious exemption, although the EEOC doesn't always agree, you can ask questions about that sincerely held religious belief. That's what the requirement is. You can ask questions about if someone says, hey, my body's a temple and vaccinations desecrate my temple. You can always ask whether they've been vaccinated before. And if they have been vaccinated before, then you can deny in general that you may deny in general that accommodation, depending on the circumstances. It's very, very fact specific. I think we're going to see potentially a narrowing of the religious exemptions as we move forward, and these things are worked out in the courts, just like any other thing that we see that takes time to get worked out in the courts. But right now, the number one accommodation being made for those is weekly testing.
Yeah. And my guidance to folks on all of this has always been, take your political perspectives out of this as much as you possibly can and look at it from a perspective of what makes sense for your health, well-being, your family, and let that argument be the argument that resonates. If your children, and I had this conversation, kids can't start school without proof of inoculations and vaccines. So right. To your point, if you're claiming all of a sudden that you have a religious exemption and you didn't have one before, and your kids are in school or you went to school, unless it's a newfound faith that didn't exist before, how do you justify that? So I just encourage people, try to separate yourself from the vitriol that's out there, from the constant swirl, and make it as much of a fact-based decision as you can with the right inputs and guidance, and not managing by social media. So that's my 2 cents on all of it, regardless of where you land with it, right? We've got lots of folks who manage by magazine and social media these days, and that's not always the best source of information. So
yeah, especially depending if your magazine is Guns and Ammo, it may not have the same information that you may get out of Scientific Weekly.
Yes, really good point. And we see this all the time. Tara can attest to this, because I think she and I have been on some webinars where there's a lot of great information out there on social media, and there's a lot of really bad and misguided information and newly found experts about any topic you can even imagine. So unless someone has real experience or credentials like you have to be an attorney, then be very wary of the advice you're taking, because you could be taking advice from someone who really has no basis for providing you that advice and leading you down a really bad path. So please make sure that the advice you're getting is credible. So thank you guys so much. Getting a lot of really great feedback here. Anything you'd like to leave us with, Bill? I know you've got to jump because you're speaking soon, so I don't want to make you late.
Well, Barbie, thank you so much for having me, and so nice to see, some of my nearest and dearest friends, Carla and Jeff Reese, who just said something nice. Thank you all so much for listening. And just remember, it really is a work in progress, and we're doing the best that we can with the information that we have. Everyone is doing that. My job is to protect employers when they're accused of discrimination or doing something unlawful. We do a really good job of that. And we are very cooperative with the agencies, and they've been very cooperative with us by and large. And so I applaud the agencies for what they're doing. But the most important thing that you can do is protect your company. Protect your company, protect your employees first. If you have a question about something, don't hesitate to ask, because odds are a lot of other people have the same question, and they're going to want to find out from you as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And for all of you who are watching today, and for those of you who might not be able to watch it, this will immediately post itself to LinkedIn. I will also download it and post it to my YouTube channel. And if you'd like a link to that, if you have coworkers who you'd like to watch it, maybe you lead an HR team and you'd like for your team to watch this so they can get as informed as you are, just look out for the link for the YouTube channel, or you can email me or DM me and I'll send you that link. I try to post each and every one of these sessions out there so that people who can't see it live can see it. And sometimes scrolling through LinkedIn to find something can be really difficult. So I give it a permanent home on a YouTube channel so that you can see it whenever you want to. So Bill, thank you so very much. This was amazing, really insightful. Would love to have you back whenever you would like to be here. If there's something you'd like to share with the audience, I'm sure they'd love to listen. So thank you. I wish you the best in your speaking engagement coming up here in just a few minutes. And thank you to everyone for your patience. Had a little technical issue here and there, and the cat. So, that's life these days. But thank you all for being here, and I will see you next week at the table.
Thank you, guys.
All right. End the broadcast.